Now, earlier I mentioned that if you're a data engineer, you probably are thinking you don't want to write all of your, transform pipelines by creating a bunch of SQL strings. And that makes sense. And if you're a lead, a manager, an architect, you probably don't want your team doing like everything just through SQL strings. So here's kind of a little bit of an intro to what the data frame API looks like. So this is where Spark lets you work with objects that represent things like tables, queries, and columns. So it allows you to programmatically manipulate your data to do more complex things. And it's nothing too crazy. There's a few advanced bits in here. But the basic operations are fairly straightforward. So for example, in SQL, where you would do a select, the data frame API lets you call select or select expressions to select different columns or evaluate expressions from a certain data set. And similarly for various other operations. So the query that we just did, the one that found the most popular pages in that hour with the word Spark, we would write that something like this in the data frame object API. We'd say spark.table page counts, .filter project matches en, another .filter for page like Spark, and then an order by request descending. And if we run this along with that display that you see underneath, the display says, hey, it's not just a query, I want to actually see some answers here. We should see the first few answers. And what I'm going to do is just kind of take this apart to give you a look step by step at what's going on in here. Just so you can see, like, where does some long expression like this come from? So if we go spark.table page counts, this gives us a query or data frame that kind of represents select star. It kind of represents everything that we connected to that table name page counts. I'm not going to display it here because I want to save a little time. But you can see that what I've done in this next cell is composed several steps. So we're saying, give me everything from page counts. And then we're saying, well, take that and I want you to filter just for the English project. And then we're saying, that's great, but let's take that and let's put another filter on here where the page column, that's what this apostrophe page is doing, contains the word Spark in it. And you can see that each of these, step 1, step 2, and step 3, is effectively its own query. And we're composing these queries together. So we're saying, like I was describing in my narrative, take the first thing and then wrap it in another query with a filter, and then wrap it in another query with another filter. And you might be wondering, well, wait a second, if I'm creating all these queries and nesting and all this, isn't that going to be really messy and inefficient? And the answer is no, because Spark has an optimizer that will restructure your query and clean it up before it actually executes. So just like a database has a query optimizer and a query planner, Spark has a very sophisticated optimizer and query planner that will take this and create a more efficient representation in order to actually move the data around as quickly as possible. So in the longer course, we actually spend almost an entire day learning how Spark actually does this so that we can get the best performance out of the system. So, okay, well, I'm going to cruise past a couple of these details, again, for time reasons, but I put them in here so that when you look at the version, I'll give out, like I said, an HTML version of this notebook that you can look at without, worrying about Spark. After the webinar, you'll be able to kind of take a look and review some of these details. I also made a note about where the documentation lives, because even though we're not going to explore the docs today, usually sometime around this time, once people have seen all the options, sometimes they start getting a little bit anxious. Well, hey, there's so many ways to do this. It sounds really exciting, but how can I learn more about it? So there's great free documentation online under the Apache Spark project. And the places to focus on for data processing are the dataset class, the column class, relational grouped dataset, which is important for aggregations, and this package object down here has this long link called org Apache Spark SQL functions. And that has tons and tons of built-in, very performant functions for doing all sorts of things with your data. So let's see, I'm going to run another query here.